All right, I think we're ready to start. Thanks everyone who's dialed in from wherever you are. This looks to be like a very fun, programmatic web session. Looking forward to it. Some introductions as we start. On the line, we have a star-studded cast from Bauer SL Media. Christian, if you would like to start, introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Christian Baser, and I'm the president of Bauer SL Media, the global digital division of the Bauer Media Group.
Perfect. Thank you, Christian. Next, we have Vicky. Vicky, go on ahead.
Hi. Hey, everybody. I'm Vicky Sue. I'm the VP of Online Marketing at Bauer SL Media.
Perfect. Thank you, Vicky. Next, we have Kieran Collins from the operative side.
Hey, everyone. I'm Kieran. I'm the services architect at Operative.
Perfect. And I'm Adam Hecht. I run business development at Operative, and Kieran and I are essentially the architects of Operative Programmatic solution, which we'll be talking a little bit about today. So just to get started, I wanted to go through a little bit of how Operative views exchanges and how we view the programmatic space from a company standpoint, and a lot of this was formulated through our work with Bauer. So Bauer SL Media was an excellent partner as we dug into this product, as we dug into this space, and our thesis, really what you can see on the screen right now, is that publishers should be taking control back from SSPs, from partners, and optimizing their RTB space based on actual performance. And that's the long and short of it. That revenue is king, and partners should be held accountable for their performance. What we think is that publishers should be having their partners actively compete over their inventory and not be forced to hand over impressions when partners aren't holding up their end of the bargain, which includes both eCPM and fill rate, right? Because the combination of the two is what leads to revenue. Bauer used operative strategies and our automation, and it allowed them to leverage a granular taxonomy and ultimately hold their partners responsible for driving revenue and continuing success. So next we have a slide here that's just how we view the overall publisher space. There's a number of different ways to drive yield: custom deals, direct sales, partnerships, programmatic direct, and RTB. And Operative Compete really leverages our strategies and our automation tools to drive performance on the RTB sector. If we zoom in on RTB, we see there's actually a couple of different ways to do that. You have your high eCPM exchanges, folks with solid fill rates, and then ultimately backfill. And Operative Compete drives revenue across the three of them. So just to summarize, our viewpoint of the space, that there's been a black box hiding a lot of performance, hiding a lot of data through exclusivity requirements, a general lack of transparency, latency issues, financial performance, and logistical struggles. Publishers have become frustrated with the SSP ecosystem. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Christian Basler, who is going to just go into a little bit about Bauer SL's history and provide a more detailed introduction of our relationship.
Yeah, as I said earlier, Bauer SL is the global digital division of the Bauer Media Group. Just to give some background, Bauer Media Group has around 1,000 brands across print, radio, and television across 16 countries with more than 10,000 employees. So it's a huge media company operating globally. And so in August last year, we launched Bauer SL Media as a standalone company, standalone division focusing on the digital business in the US. And then the decision was made to actually take this model of separation global in February this year. And so now in the US, we basically scaled from 0 users 3 years ago to now more than 25 million unique users monthly across brands in the entertainment space like In Touch, Weekly, and Life and Style, but also in the teen space like J14, M and Twist, and then we have a women's vertical like Women's World and First for Women. And all of the growth that we have been having traffic-wise was totally organic from search and social, and also a lot of direct traffic. And on the monetization side, it's important to highlight that direct sales was actually quite a minimal revenue source for us, direct sales on the advertising side. Because of our business model on the print side, which mostly relies on single copy newsstand sales, less on subscription and advertising sales, we didn't have the direct sales set up to truly build a traditional direct ad sales model digitally. So we had to get creative, and from day one, 3 years ago, again, 0 users and almost 0 employees, to now we scaled almost exclusively using third-party ad networks and third-party companies that we're going to talk about later in the session. And almost all of the revenue we're still generating today comes from these third-party sources. So for us, maintaining and building those third-party relationships and optimizing all these partners has been the core focus of our business. And we started working with Operative in August last year. And the situation before having Operative was that we were actually still on DFP small business. We had less than the traffic that we have now. And we worked with quite a lot of partners on the exchange side, on the network side. So there was a lot of manual labor, and a lot of overheads involved in creating reports and changing the priorities. And so the result was that it was very hard to maintain and to create reports on performance, but also the CPMs were lower than we expected. And again, given the scale we have on those channels traffic-wise and the importance there, we saw a very big revenue opportunity by optimizing those channels. And so when Operative came in, the first thing that we did was migrate from small business DFP to premium. And for us, that was very beneficial to work with Operative because through their network of publishers, we were actually able to get a better deal than going directly. But then the second step was also to introduce a better ad taxonomy, which helped us to package placements differently and better, both on the still small but existing direct sales side, but most importantly on the network and exchange side. And another step that Operative did was really evaluate and look at our ad stack as we had it before, all the different partners at different priority levels, and basically start from scratch. Instead of going with many and having them compete against each other, the decision was made to select fewer partners, better performing partners, and build strong relationships and do more optimizations across those. And that really increased the CPM from what we saw at the time to the number we have today, which is significantly larger, but at the same time also simplified the ad setup and also the reporting across all those partners. And also very useful for us was to use Operative's ad operation team as a third-party team extension, where if we have more needs on the direct sales side or just in general, it was always very easy for us to get requests done quickly and efficiently. And one other way that we are very using Operative very much for our reportings, where on our side we look at revenue daily, weekly, and monthly. And so as you can imagine, having a lot of revenue partners and pulling those reports daily, both just from a reporting standpoint but also from an optimization standpoint, was a very extensive process. And through Operative's tool that they have to be able to automate this process, but also through the team extensions, this has been much easier of a process for us, and we were able to gain access to reports much faster. And so as for the future, again, for us, programmatic space is very important for us as we grow the company, because we see this as a way to efficiently scale monetization the same time we scale traffic. And Operative for us has been a great partner on the strategy side, defining who to work with in what way and optimizing across those channels. So we're looking to continue that relationship for the strategy part, but also for the additional resources that are available through the team extension at any time. And with that, I'll give it back to you.
Great. Christian, thank you so much for that. So to dive in a little bit on the points that Christian was talking about, we're going to move piece by piece through sort of the preoperative zone and then all through our relationship. So Vicky, Christian mentioned that you guys were working with multiple partners before operative came in. So my first big question is, how are you evaluating them when you decided to work with them?
There was really not a proper evaluation. It was the thought that the more partners we bring in, the more competition we'll be able to create. So in theory, that was supposed to drive up the CPM. But in reality, because too many partners, you end up creating a daisy chain, and our CPM is actually going down.
So you brought in these partners, you created a waterfall, a daisy chain, and you were not seeing performance on the CPM side. Interesting. So then, what did you feel was good about the Bauer side? Why did you feel those CPMs should be higher?
Well, Bauer has a lot of great content, and they have great audience, and those are the valuable audience on the marketplace where all the e-commerce companies and like to go to. However, our CPM does not reflect the quality of our audience.
Got it. And then, what were the biggest areas that you saw for improvement?
So I think the biggest areas we see an improvement is we were just adding more ads to the page to offset the lower CPM. But instead, we really should focus on driving up the CPM with scalability, with the proper infrastructures, and with the right industry experts.
And that's great. Thank you, Vicky. So Kieran, when Vicky brings up scalability, infrastructure, and expertise, can you talk a little bit about especially scalability and infrastructure?
Sure. So what we did was, we have a scalable kind of ad operations team, so we're still able to drive revenue in the exchanges. So I'll start with infrastructure. We have a tool that can kind of push all of the rates and allocations to DFP. But then, there's also some work to be done driving revenue in the exchanges, controlling floors, applying the appropriate blocks, etc. So we kind of have the scalability and expertise to do that. We have a large, ad operations team, and we have a ton of industry experience and exposure to all these different systems.
Cool. And I think it's good to note that when the evaluation first began, when Operative came on board to take a look at all these partners, one of the things that we focused on almost immediately was the development of some really strong KPIs. We wanted to have thresholds, performance thresholds for these partners. So as I mentioned earlier, when we first started, we want to hold them accountable for performance. And we knew that consolidation was going to be inevitable based on just the sheer amount of partners that were there. So when we first started and we were establishing success metrics, Vicky, I know you guys had some input over that, but was there anything that we introduced that was different than what you were typically using?
Definitely. So before we started working together, we were looking at CPM by partners instead of looking at the true eCPM that takes in the fill rate. So we're not really seeing the true value per impression.
So you weren't taking fill rate into account when you were calculating performance metrics?
No, and we're not even taking the passback into that calculation as well.
Okay. So, at Operative, when we judge the success of partners, we call it true eCPM, and it's really a blended measure of fill rate and eCPM, reported eCPM. So the best way to think about it, if a partner is giving you a CPM of $2, but they're only filling 50% of the inventory you send them, we call that a true eCPM of $1. And when you talk about true eCPM, and it's a much better indicator of where your revenue is going to be. Because just because a partner is getting you a $2 CPM, you could be earning more revenue by sending impressions to a partner who's getting you $1.50, but filling close to 100%. So the introduction of true eCPM allowed us to really take a look at partners that were on an essentially level playing field. and make decisions on consolidation there. And, sort of speaking about consolidation, Vicki, why do you think that's a good strategy?
So, there's only so many times we have to, our day-to-day work life. And, when we were running so many partners, there was just not enough time to properly manage each one of them, let alone looking at the data, thoroughly to make sure that, we are really generating the revenues from our expectations.
Perfect. And Kieran, do you think there comes a point of diminishing returns when you're talking about competition within the ad server is there a point of diminishing returns when you're adding partners?
Sure. So I think that Bauer initially was working with something like 30 plus partners, something like that, which, I mean, even if you do have the infrastructure in place to, automate some of that DSP data, you still want to drive revenue through those exchanges, and just being able to, pull levers and manage 30 different systems gets a little tough. So it gets very tough. So what we did was we just kind of, established thresholds in metrics to weed out low performers, and then I think that we got it down to about 6 or 7, and that's where we are right now.
Perfect. And there always comes a point when you do need to eliminate low performers. Regardless of business relationships, sometimes it needs to be done. So that sort of hard line in the sand, where you have performance thresholds and you expect your partners to meet them, is super important. And that is how to continue to drive revenue through those exchanges. So when it comes to backfill, though, Vicki, you mentioned backfill earlier. What are your thoughts on backfill, and how is Bauer looking at backfill sort of before Operative came into the picture?
So like Christian said, our taxonomy wasn't set up in a way that I can actually see the breakdown of, where the inventories are going, are being filled or backfilled. So I have very little visibility into our true ECPM, and all I know is the overall ECPM was too low, and it's below our expectation, but we really don't know why it's too low. Is it because we're not filling enough, or we're just doing too much prospect?
Got it. And Kieran, do you think publishers can actually see good ECPMs as backfill?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely can if you work with the right backfill partners. So we obviously have a lot of connections in the industry, and we have a lot of exposure to all these different partners. So it's just working with the right one, doing some A/B testing, that's big, and kind of holding partners accountable for maintaining a good ECPM with 100% backfill or close to it.
And you talk about visibility and maintaining and good partners. Do you think does the automation come into play with backfill too? Is that something that publishers should be looking at, automating their backfill as well, and having dedicated lines for that sort of thing?
Sure. I mean, you certainly can do that. Yeah, I mean, you can certainly set up passbacks in DSP. A lot of publishers will just directly have a passback from one exchange to another, so they won't pass back to DSP, really just because that still counts as an impression and they'll get charged for that. So you kind of have to evaluate the cost of ad serving fees there. So.
Perfect. Thank you. And now to the fun part, right? And Christian mentioned this, Vicki mentioned this. One of the first things Operative did when we came into Bauer and we migrated them over to DSP Premium was start looking at a taxonomy redesign. Folks that are familiar with Operative know the way we talk about publisher inventory in terms of products and packages, and really all inventory, regardless of price and placement, should be considered premium. And taxonomies should really be reflecting that idea. So when we brought up the idea of a taxonomy redesign for all of Bauer's digital properties, and as Christian mentioned, there is a significant number of them, Vicki, why did you, I guess the easiest question is, why did you agree to a redesign of the entirety of the Bauer taxonomy?
So there was a lot of information I was hoping to be able to get to optimize our programmatic business. So the first thing is we need to have the ability to see the inventory breakdown by site sections. And also the direct sales team needs more flexibilities towards creating different packages and a more accurate inventory forecasting.
Perfect. And then, Kieran, this is sort of for you now, because you were really the architect of Bauer's new taxonomy. When you segmented their inventory in the way that you needed to, how did that affect what we were seeing on the CPM side?
Well, I mean, just first, you know, if we take a step back, like Vicki said, it kind of enabled their direct sales team much more because they were actually able to package better. They were able to forecast and report really for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, with kind of a wonky small biz setup, it's very difficult. But we were able to build really granular kind of packages in DFP Premium that could also then be rolled up to a broader site target that was really flexible. And so from a targeting and exchange perspective, that helped us immensely. Because we were really then able to kind of segment out instead of having a run of sight lines for the exchanges or really not even having much insight into how we can more granularly target. We could build exchange lines per vertical, and we definitely saw tremendous uplift there from eCPM.
So one of the things to keep in mind, though, is when you're doing something like that, you really have to build this inventory in two separate places. And then again, this is where automation really drives the strategy and helps out a lot. Because as we're redesigning Bauer's taxonomy to make it more granular, to build ad units, to segment across their different verticals, we had to mirror that inventory creation in the actual exchanges. And that in and of itself is still a very manual process. But luckily, as Kieran mentioned a couple of times, we have the expertise and we have access to teams and the resources to be able to help us with that. Bringing everything back into DFP or the ad server through automation was the easy part, and it allowed us to really take advantage of the redesigned taxonomy, the granularity of the ad units in the redesign, and build inventory exchanges, mirror it in DFP, and see CPM lists there. So getting back to the whole idea of the waterfall, Vicki, you mentioned daisy chaining before. What did it look like for you? The waterfall that you had, or daisy chain, however you had it set up, how were you managing that, and how often?
Yeah. So I mean, it's when you have so many partners and so much time you can do, we were kind of in a mode of set it and forget it, because it's just impossible for us to really manage all the partners in the way that we wanted to. So reporting is a lot to digest, and we're not really getting the information to make the proper decisions.
That makes sense. So, one of the things that we did when we came in almost immediately was Kieran and I sat down and decided on a strategy. And part of that was what we mentioned earlier, placing all the partners on a level playing field, determining true eCPM, and weighting allocations that way. But one of the immediate things that we realized was we were going to have to make these updates daily to really react to market changes. We based our allocations and our waterfall structure on a data look back, but it was really the automation piece that enabled this whole thing to happen. So, Kieran, my question for you is, why did we decide on daily, and why daily versus weekly versus every other day?
So for updating the actual, so updating the rates and the allocations, you're saying?
Yep.
Okay. So maybe so the exchanges themselves, maybe you'll want to update the floors, update blocks or so, maybe every week. Maybe every other week. It really depends on your strategy. A lot of that depends on how the demand is reacting to your content. But in DFP, you want to make sure that the returns are always reflected, so that the eCPMs and the exchanges, those are always reflected in DFP, and mainly so that you can have adducts compete dynamically around that. And then also you want to make sure that you're allocating the exchanges by their performance. So if maybe across some of your products you have one exchange performing much better than the other, you want to make sure that exchange A is getting the largest share of voice, or the most impressions.
Perfect. So Vicky, why do you think it's fair to judge partners by true eCPM instead of just reported eCPM?
Because that's the true value of each impression we sold. And by having the right data, it allows us to make the right business decisions on how we should allocate the inventories to the partners.
Perfect. And sort of before we move on from Waterfall, Kieran, I'll throw something to you one more time. We went back and forth a lot about priority levels. We came across the idea of using either price priority or network. Mm-hmm. in DFP. You want to just go into a little bit about why each of them could be effective?
Sure. So we use network right now. You can really use either, and we built the tool so that we can accommodate either, because we know that a lot of publishers will have specific use cases. So we use network right now so that we can just really easily allocate impressions on an FOB basis. After your paid lines have served, when revenue kicks in, we wanted to be able to easily update on an FOB basis. So we push to network. Perhaps if people are using private marketplaces, something like that, they'll want to cap it. So then maybe they'll push using price priority and then just boost the actual priority level on the line so that it competes a bit higher. So I mean, we really need to be flexible, because sometimes Bauer even likes to switch on some sections, and if they have a PMP in place, then sometimes we'll change that so we're able to hit really quickly there.
Perfect. And Vicky, Vicky brought up making the right business decision and how data fits into all the things that we're doing here. And Christian as well brought up the idea of reporting and how important it is to have access to the right reports, the right data. I'll sort of spout off a little bit on what I think is good for data, and then Kieran, I'll toss it over to you for a question that I had. But from my point of view, data, and we're not just talking audience data. We're not talking first, third-party audience data. I'm talking about actual business intelligence, the idea of making, as Vicky called it, the right business decision. And from our point of view, operating what we talked about, revenue-based decisions trumping everything else, because growing revenue is really the name of the game here, and especially on the ad sales programmatic side. So drawing reports from all these disparate sources is absolutely necessary, but I think that one of the key components that we put together for Bauer were daily performance reports. So it's actually checking by ad unit, by site, by vertical, by day. How is my ad business doing? So with that in mind, Kieran, you sort of are an expert in Excel and collating all these reports. Why do you think it's important to make sure that you're tracking this day by day instead of week by week?
Tracking in terms of tracking the data?
The performance.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, as we've seen, the performance can vary quite a bit from exchange to exchange, even across different products. So it's really, really important to just make sure that that's reflective, basically in real time in the server. So one day Rubicon might be really performing great over a specific product, then the next day OpenX might be performing better. So we just want to make sure that that's accurately reflected, so that you're getting the most bang for your buck there. That's what's really driving the eCPM.
Perfect. So, I'm sort of done with questions for Vicky here, and I just wanted to take a minute and review sort of what we've done for Bauer before I go into the results all this fun stuff, right? So first and foremost, we took a look at the relationships they had with their partners, helped them establish some performance metrics, not the least of which was this idea of true eCPM. So we brought that in, consolidated their partners, implemented some 100% backfill solutions. Then we redesigned the entire taxonomy to really get it reflective of their business and their inventory and how they should be selling based on their business goals. We've implemented some automation software so we can make daily waterfall updates based on the strategy that Kieran and I devised. And most important, I think, is that we made this data completely visible to Bauer, so they were able to, on the fly, make these revenue-based decisions that Vicki had mentioned. So what did that get them? Where did they end up with these strategies and this automation? And then these are the results of what we did. So Q1 2014 versus Q1 2015, there's an 89% increase in the revenue that was flowing through the exchanges that Operative was managing for Bauer SL. There's a 56% lift in eCPM overall. That's not reflective of the time period I'm talking about. That's been since we started. And they actually sent more inventory to the exchanges, absolutely, but only 6%. So the gains that we saw were due to the taxonomy redesign, the daily waterfall updating, the data that we made available for the right business decisions. And that's the long and short of it. So with that, I think we're going to open this up for some questions. You can type in your questions, and we'll be seeing them and pick out a couple of good ones. So here's a good question. What do you recommend for publishers that aren't active on the exchanges now? We have AdX and a number of partners that are more like traditional ad networks. Okay, so I'll give a quick high-level answer, and I'll let Kieran dive into this one a little bit because I know he has a lot of good ideas here. But first and foremost, I think if you're already using AdX, you're active on the exchanges. Unfortunately, you're not really driving competition that way, and I think sort of the first thing I would do would be introduce another exchange into the system to drive competition through dynamic allocation. Kieran, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. So you want to scalably inject competition in so that you can manage it easily. Of course, our tool really helps you do that. But you definitely want to drive up the price of each impression so that AdX then will have to work harder when it's competing dynamically. It'll have to beat that. And also the other exchanges will have to work harder too because they won't be winning the impressions. The bids will have to be a bit higher as long as you're segmenting appropriately.
So I'm going to be a bit of a jerk here and ask a follow-up question on that because I love the way you talk about this. But when you're implementing a new exchange, how do you get a sense of what initial rates should be?
Sure. I mean, a lot of that is talking with the publisher, finding out, what kind of content they have, see if they have any baselines, see how the other exchanges are performing, talk with the exchange partner themselves, see exactly kind of what eCPM they normally get in return for that specific publisher's vertical. So I mean, there's a lot of different things that play into account there. But I would say then it's kind of A/B testing. You can go through maybe a 2-week trial period, have the floors pretty low, and then see what eCPMs you're getting in return, and then adjust as needed from there.
Thanks, Kieran. Here's one about our strategy. How did you settle on a particular look-back window? What was the look-back window, and was there any information that you based that on. So I think they're asking about the, I mentioned the data look back window. Okay. When we do daily waterfall updates. Yep. You want to dive into that one?
Sure. So we settled on 7 days. I mean, you can really set that look back. It's up to you. We decided on 7 days because we figured that is a good kind of just picture of current performance. If you do 30 days, you know, that you might not get the current picture. That you might be looking back too far. If you do 1 day, you know, there can just be some anomalies in there or some eCPM spikes, and you don't want to kind of determine performance all based on that. Does that make sense?
Yep, perfectly. I think that's a good question actually comes through. This is actually a really good one. I like this one a lot. How homogeneous was the inventory? Are there cutoffs where it doesn't make sense to serve ads at all due to low eCPM? So, I mean, Vicky, do you want to give a little bit of insight into Bauer's inventory to answer that homogeneous question?
Yes. So, you know, a lot of publishers feel that, you know, they'd rather not sell the inventory if the CPM is too low. Bauer takes a different approach. I think there is a good spot between, you know, a slightly lower price, but you're still generating revenue from it.
Perfect. In terms of the inventory that we were working with, it wasn't really homogeneous. They had a lot of different audiences, right? Christian mentioned they have, you know, an entertainment vertical. They have a female-centric vertical, and they also have a teen vertical. Now, the teen vertical is a particular challenge, right? Because there's a lot of, you know, non-tracking, COPA regulations and things that we need to deal with there. But in terms of, you know, getting back to what Vicky said, I think that one of the very few times it would ever make sense to not sell ad space is if there's the possibility for revenue-generating house ads. And I've seen, you know, a number of publishers with a ton of very sophisticated house ad strategies. For a publisher like Bauer SL, where the vast majority of their revenue is going to be derived from digital ad sales, house ads can serve a purpose, but ultimately, if you can get money for ad space, I think it makes sense to go that route. If you're looking into doing a significant house ad strategy, it might make sense to internally determine an ROI on your subscription numbers, or even what does it look like to use house ads to drive traffic to your highest performing ad unit. So hopefully that answered your question. Next, how often do you anticipate publishers having to redo their taxonomy to take advantage of this solution? Kieran, you want to take a stab at this one?
Sure. Yeah, so I should probably clarify. Bauer was a unique situation where they were coming from small business, and then, you know, we decided to redo their taxonomy just because it really needed to be cleaned up, and then we could, you know, leverage the benefits of DFP Premium and create better packages. I mean, most publishers, if their taxonomy is already fleshed out, we can create a product catalog around that. If you guys are familiar with Operative One, it's very similar to the concept of the Operative One catalog, where, you know, we can, you know, just basically package your inventory appropriately, and then, you know, make pushes to that, and then bring in all the data against those products. So we actually can handle that all on our side internally. So I mean, that's, I think that's a great benefit right there.
Okay, just looking through some questions here. So you mentioned giving control back to publishers, but what about those that still would want to work through operatives? Would you create and push reports to publishers and make optimization recommendations? This sounds like a question coming from someone using Operative One today. If that's the case, we're more than happy to talk through that. So the tool that we're using for Bauer is standalone. Doesn't depend on Operative One. There is, you know, no integration between the two necessary. But for Operative One users, you know, the long answer is probably too long. But the short answer is yes, that we are going to be building this functionality into Operative 1. Unfortunately, I can't commit to any timelines on a webinar. I think our product folks might disagree with me on that one. All right, we can do some more questions. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of questions come through on this one. So I think I'm going to summarize all the questions that we're seeing in one. Do you have an opinion on header bidding? And the answer is yes, we have an opinion. Next question. No, I'm only kidding. So I'll start this, and Kieran and I will probably trade off. So I do have an opinion on header bidding. I think it is a good thing. I think it's smart for publishers to do everything they can to increase yield. However, I don't think header bidding is the silver bullet that everyone's looking for. I think what everyone is looking for is a unified auction. And I think header bidding is a step toward that, but I don't think it's a giant step, and I think there are some issues around it. My personal biggest issue with header bidding is the idea that we're inserting, ad calls before content loads. And, Vicky can attest to this as well. Content is what makes a publisher money. And anytime there's something that could potentially, even no matter how small the potential is, to interfere with content loading, I have a fundamental issue with that from a publisher side. And that latency can then extend. I mean, an ad call is an ad call, right? So every little extra thing that happens before DFP ultimately increases latency. I've also been intimately familiar with some of the implementation hurdles that come with header bidding, just from the need of a large dev team and the timeline that it entails, and then the fact that publishers have to do it on multiple sites and multiple pages. Kieran, you guys want to add some things to this?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, latency and data leakage, those are huge. Sometimes there could be some data leakage issues. I mean, also you definitely have to make sure that the bids that are being passed through are actually reflective of basically what the demand side is bidding. I've heard that there's some cases where the bids will be kind of artificially high so that they can kind of preempt the ad selection process a bit more. If you have multiple header bidders working together on the same page, sometimes that can get a little difficult. They might not play nicely. Yeah, I mean, there can be low fill rates. I think that it is a good option because it can allow you to segment your inventory even more, segment your remnant even more. So header bidding can kind of focus on the high value eCPM. The fill rates might not be great there, but then that allows, that kind of allows us to do a lot of open market optimization. So, I mean, these two can actually work hand in hand pretty well.
Right, and quite frankly, Bauer does use a couple of header bidding solutions, and they also utilize Operative to optimize the rest of their waterfall. So by no means are the two mutually exclusive. It's just a matter of determining which inventory goes where and making the best use of both tools. So hope that answered the question. I think we have time for one more.
I see one there just about metrics. So eCPM, CPA, CTR, viewability. Yeah, I mean, we can kind of customize that to the publisher's needs. It's all about them, how they want to measure performance. So, we're doing this by what we're calling true eCPM. Yeah, I mean, if a publisher wants to focus more on like conversions, that's fine. And then, it's just optimizing the exchanges based on that and allocating appropriately. Or viewability as well, same thing.
Perfect. All right, I think that's about it for what we have time for. Thank you all so much for joining us in the webinar. Vicki, thank you. Christian, thank you. Folks from Bauer SL have been superstars on this. Really appreciate them. Kieran, thank you too. And thank you to Operative's marketing team. Everyone else on the webinar, thank you so much for joining us. We hope this was informative. And that'll be that. Thank you so much.